My life really began the night of my NDE.
I felt like I was on a balcony looking down, and I saw this vehicle with smoke coming out, and I looked real close, and that was my car. Then I stared at it, and slumped over the steering wheel was my body.
I was pulled out of my body, and all of a sudden I looked down and I could see my body stuck in the mud. But I'm in a body. I can feel it. No longer am I cold and freezing and stuck in the mud, but I'm warm and I'm filled with a love and a peace that I cannot explain.
Next thing I knew, I was looking down at the top of my car. It was like, whoa, this is really cool.
And I remember a loud roaring sound, a buzzing sound, bells going off, and just kind of a sinking in within to myself.
I was wishing I could communicate to the medical team that this is okay. You do not need to save this girl. I was happy. I was in peace. I was in knowingness.
I lifted up out of my body, and I just felt all the pain went away, and I was in this other ethereal body that was perfect, that didn't have the damaged face, the fractured skull.
And I separated from my body. I was up above this scene, and I could hear the nurse say, she does not have a pulse, she does not have a pressure.
At that moment, I found myself at the top of the hospital room, and I was floating there, and I remember my face was upward, and I also remember consciously thinking, the body is back there. I kept referring to it as the body's down there, it's down there. But I also knew I did not want to look at my body. I didn't want to acknowledge it, and I certainly didn't want to get back in it because it was extremely painful. So at that point, I began to float upwards, and I began floating over what they call negative treetops. I call negative treetops. When you take a photograph and you have a negative, it's got that kind of different look about it, like a negative. I started floating over these treetops, and there were other entities or beings and people, a couple that I recognized, one is my grandmother, waving to me like, hi, come on in. And it was like I was floating above and looking down, and it was so beautiful.
And I looked over to the right, and I saw all these relatives of mine who had died before, and they were waving and smiling, and I smiled and waved, but I didn't feel like I was supposed to go over and talk to them, because that's sort of not why I was there.
In an instant, I was sucked away like a piece of dust in a vacuum hose, and I was cascading through a dark tunnel.
I suddenly lost interest in what was going on down there, because I saw this white light over here.
I experienced being in a dark tunnel. The tunnel felt familiar, it felt comfortable, it was dark, as they say, often in these stories.
There was this feeling that was coming through this tunnel of love.
At that point, I just kept floating, and I saw this big tunnel. I had a very atypical experience. Big tunnel with a light at the end of the tunnel.
And there before me was this being of light, which had previously appeared as just a little white dot at the end of this tunnel.
I said, whoa, there's the white light, I'm going.
And so I just floated through the tunnel. I entered the tunnel, and I floated toward this light. This amazing, beautiful, peaceful, loving, all-encompassing, and unconditional light. You really can't express it in human words because it completely limits the experience, and there are no human words to express it. I say it's more of an emotion.
And there was this tunnel that seemed very dark, but there was this great light at the end.
No matter what happens to you, and you see the light, you look for that light and go with that, and everything will be fine.
And I just sort of thought, I want to go through that. And the next thing, I was through it.
And when I came out of the tunnel, I was surrounded by the most beautiful flowers. Glorious, colorful flowers like you don't see on earth. Hues and colors that I can't even really explain to myself now and cannot really explain to you, but they were gorgeous.
And I was in this place, but it wasn't a place like here. It was an environment, an atmosphere. And it was love.
I kept thinking, oh, I'm home, I'm home. That's all I kept thinking.
Total, everything is fine and always will be and always has been. It felt like home.
Impossible to describe, but so wonderful I can't stop trying to find words for it.
It was amazing. It was total bliss, total joy, total love, total acceptance.
It's sort of like when you're being born. As an infant, you come out and all of a sudden you're inundated with lights and sound and cold and wet, and you're just inundated. All your senses are just overwhelmed.
It felt like that's where I belonged, and that's the way it's supposed to feel all the time. But, of course, that's not the way it feels here.
Quietly, steadily, a white light got closer and closer.
The light was so bright that it was brighter than 10,000 suns. And I immediately said, this should be burning my retinas. But it wasn't. It was a gentle but powerful light. It was pulling me. It was pulling me like a gentle magnet.
And I was being just sucked into that light.
I was in a loving presence and white light that just filled me with a sense of peace.
And then there was another dimension that I saw, and the light was there.
A little angel came to me. It was my little brother. He told me it was my brother. He told me that he had died.
There was an angel on the ceiling of this room where I was staying. And this angel was very beautiful and had this glow from within, like a lantern. And he was in these flowing white robes. And I somehow knew him, and he took my hand, such as it was, and we went flying out through the window. And I had no fear. It was like I'd been flying through windows all my life.
In that white light, every question I ever had, any idea about what was what or how things worked, was answered immediately.
In that moment you have an awakening. In that moment you often remember who you are. You remember so many things, and you have access to divine knowledge, and you have access to all the mysteries of the universe.
And the closer I got, the more I was filled with an ecstasy, with a love, with an unconditional love of me as Andy. And as I got closer to the light, all of a sudden I popped into a giant sphere. It was about the size of a basketball coliseum, and I was suspended in the middle of this sphere.
This being was all things that ever were, are, or will be.
And this being came up to me, genderless, very, very powerful, loving being, who just took me in its arms and held me, loving me for just exactly who I am, my quirks, my virtues, my strengths, my weaknesses, everything about me.
You see who you are completely, you see your flaws, you see your gifts, and you judge yourself because everything is reflected back to you.
And all around me, at all parts of the sphere, up, down, sideways, left, right, all over, were miniature motion pictures of my lives and what was going on. And I could see, I could touch, I could feel, I could sense every emotion that was taking place in all of those lifetimes.
And I started seeing my life pass by, my infancy, my childhood, and I felt good about it. I'm watching myself, oh, I remember that. And
I'm sorry, that was bad. God's response was just more than I could understand at the moment. He said it was neither good nor bad. In the grander sense, it was a lesson for your learning. I could recall not only what it felt like, but how I was thinking.
And when I would concentrate on one, I would immediately be there. I would be reliving what I had lived, and I would remember the reliving. And then I would think about another area, and then I'd pop into another movie. And I would do this for some period of time, but
it was pictures from my past. And it wasn't just a photograph, it was a 3D image.
And the light was viewing me. The light knew everything that I ever thought, did, or will do. It knew everything. And the light welcomed me. And the light said, Andy, don't be afraid. And I was impressed. I mean, the light knew me and called me by my name. Called me Andy. Oh, that was pretty good. And then the light said, Andy, I love you. And then the light said, Andy, we love you.
And recalling exactly how others were feeling because of the way I was behaving.
The light has a fantastic sense of humor. We would view some of the really silly things that I did in my lifetime, and we'd be laughing at how serious I took them. Because life down here is an illusion. It's a game. Don't take it so serious.